The Young and the Restless spoilers. The illusion of perfection often shatters in Genoa City at the very moment when life seems most secure. And Claire's story is about to become the perfect example of that cruel truth. For months, she has worked to piece together a new life, to embrace love, and to heal from the shadows of her past. With Kyle's proposal, she believed she had finally reached the summit of happiness, the kind of joy that seemed destined to last forever. The engagement ring sparkled as a symbol of everything she thought she had earned: love of a man who chose her, the acceptance of a family that once doubted her, and a future she could step into without fear. But The Young and the Restless has always thrived on cruel ironies, and just when Claire believed her life was falling into place, it is about to unravel in ways she could never have imagined. Her downfall began innocently enough, in a moment of celebration. Surrounded by friends, basking in toasts and congratulations, she allowed herself to indulge in the champagne that flowed freely. One glass became two, then three, and soon the warmth of the alcohol replaced the nerves that had once weighed her down. The night was filled with laughter, promises, and visions of the future, a blur of optimism that carried her far from reason. Even as voices around her warned her not to drive, even as friends offered alternatives, Claire, in her excitement and stubbornness, insisted that she was fine. She had convinced herself that nothing could touch her on this night of triumph. It was a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. As she slipped behind the wheel, the city around her felt different, alive in ways it rarely did. The roads gleamed with the reflection of streetlights, and the world seemed to spin just slightly out of sync with her heartbeat. She pressed the accelerator harder than she should have, the speed feeding her adrenaline as if it were just another form of celebration. But in the distance, fate had already laid its trap. A Ferrari appeared in her path, too quickly for her to adjust, too suddenly for her impaired reflexes to save her. The impact was violent, shattering glass and twisting metal, a horrific collision that transformed her night of joy into a nightmare of consequence. When Claire stumbled out of the car, her heart pounding and her mind still foggy, she braced herself to confront the damage she had caused. But nothing could prepare her for the sight of who was in the other car. Nikki Newman, the matriarch, the powerhouse, the woman whose presence defined stability in Genoa City, lay motionless, her body slumped, unconscious, and terrifyingly still. In that moment, Claire's life fractured. The bride-to-be, the woman who thought she had finally escaped her troubled past, was now a criminal in the making, responsible for a tragedy that could destroy not only her future, but the fragile bonds she had built with the Newman family. The question spiraled instantly. Would Nikki survive? If she didn't, Claire would forever be branded as the woman who killed a legend. Even if Nikki did live, the consequences of Claire's reckless choice would ripple through the lives of everyone connected to her. Victor, already skeptical of her place in Kyle's life, would have the ultimate justification to cast her out and destroy her chance at happiness. Victoria, who had fought to trust her daughter again, would face the unbearable task of watching Claire self-destruct before her eyes. And Kyle, who had promised her forever, would be forced to question whether the woman he loved was capable of walking into his family's future while carrying such a devastating stain. In one reckless night, Claire transformed from a bride-to-be into a pariah. The guilt would consume her, the shame would follow her into every room, and the whispers of Genoa City society would never let her forget what she had done. Even if Nikki survived, the legal ramifications could crush her charges of reckless driving, driving under the influence, possibly even attempted manslaughter, depending on the severity of Nikki's injuries. The once promising future she envisioned could vanish overnight, replaced by trials, prison bars, and the relentless glare of public disgrace. The tragic irony is that Claire's downfall was born not from malice, but from joy, not from a desire to hurt, but from a failure to recognize her own limits. And yet, in the world of the young and the restless, intentions matter far less than consequences. The question that now hangs over the canvas is not whether Claire loved Kyle, or whether she deserved her happiness. It is whether Nikki Newman will survive, and if she doesn't, whether Claire's entire existence in Genoa City will collapse under the weight of her guilt. Claire's life in Genoa City was never going to be simple, but for a brief shimmer of time it looked close enough to fool even the most cynical onlooker. The engagement to Kyle felt like a line drawn under old sins and bruised reputations. A promise that love and steadiness could be her new baseline instead of suspicion and panic. Yet beneath the sparkle of that ring ran a fracture she would not name. The pressure valve urge to escape the mess that Audra kept stoking and the tension that Kyle, for all his vows, could not fully neutralize, and so Claire made the most human, most ruinous choice. She tried to outrun the noise in her head with a night of celebratory drinking, insisting to herself that one evening of surrender would not define her. Even as every warning light friend's raised eyebrows, the city's unforgiving gossip mill, the echo of Nikki's well-known struggle with alcohol blinked red, she did it anyway. Because fatigue is stubborn and joy is intoxicating, and there is a special kind of denial that settles over someone who has spent months proving she is not the girl people once feared. The denial that whispers you've earned this and that the rules won't apply tonight. And it is precisely that lie that greases the slide from excitement into danger. The slide that put Claire behind a wheel she should never have touched, on a road that would not forgive a single misjudged second, toward a Ferrari whose driver Nikki Newman, of all people, had every reason to be the last person Claire should imperil. And when metal shrieked and glass scattered in a cruel constellation over the asphalt, when the terrible quiet after impact made the night feel hollowed out, the entire architecture of Claire's fragile new life tilted, because consequences don't pause for intentions. And the woman who just hours before had been fielding venue menus and dress options was now barefoot on broken glass, staring at Nikki slump and unresponsive. While somewhere in the distance the sirens sprinted like judgment, in the hours that followed, the air inside every Newman and Abbott room turned dense and cold. Because even before anyone knew whether Nikki would wake easily or not at all, the calculus of fallout had already begun. And it wasn't simply legal or medical, it was spiritual, reputational, generational, the kind of factional shockwave Genoa City specializes in, where the past claws up through the floorboards to ask whether the person you trusted has really changed, or only learned better angles. Kyle felt the hit in 3 simultaneous blows: the fear for Nikki, whose loss would tear through the town like a winter storm; the fear for Claire, who had just rerouted her entire path into the teeth of a criminal case and a morality play; and the fury at Audra, whose relentless provocations had kept the worst version of this night simmering on a back burner. Because no matter how squarely Claire's choice to drink and drive sits on Claire, there is still the daily oxygen of harassment and taunting that Audra fed, the sham pregnancy ploy, the public declarations, the weaponized winks at Victor, the way she slithered into every moment of peace and salted it. And if Kyle's plan to push her out of town had once been an aggressive chess move, in the wreck's aftermath it began to feel like triage, yet the harder truth hovered. Banishing Audra would not fix what Claire had done. And if Kyle's reflex was to build a wall around his fiancée, so thick that nothing could touch her, then the lesson of Nikki's long, public fight with addiction demanded a different instinct. One that has fought its way into the Newman Abbott bloodstream over decadest instinct to face the thing, to say it out loud, to take the steps that cannot be faked. The police report, the breath test, the arraignment, the sober dawns that follow without applause. And because Genoa City almost never allows a crisis to be only one thing, the legal story immediately braided itself to a political one, and a family one, and a corporate one. Christine would push for accountability with the zeal of a lifetime spent watching enablers make tragedies immortal. Chance would follow the evidence without flinching even when Victor's gravity tried to warp the room. Michael, perpetually torn between clean counsel and complicated loyalty, would see in Claire's case a mirror of every Newman-adjacent catastrophe in which intent and image strain the definition of justice. And Audra, smelling opportunity like ozone before a strike, would not waste a sunrise before seeding the town square with venom-anonymous quotes, sly insinuations that Claire's relapse into reckless behavior was inevitable, that Kyle's judgment is permanently compromised, that Newman money will make the consequences disappear, and while she distributes those little poison seeds, she will play aggrieved, shocked that anyone could accuse her of exploiting an accident, all while texting a blogger the precise hospital corridor where the first press-friendly physician will appear. This is what Audra does, and it is why Kyle's old threat leave town or face a reckoning now stands on a new foundation, less jealousy than public safety, because the last thing Nikki's fight needs is Audra's megaphone. Yet there is a more intimate battlefield here, and it's inside Claire, because hangovers end and court dates pass, but shame has a longer half-life, particularly for someone who rebuilt her life brick by deliberate brick. She will wake to the memory of headlights and the crunch of inevitability, and she will cycle through the reflexive self-defenses. It was a celebration. Everyone drinks on nights like this. I was fine to drive before those thin excuses collapse under the weight of a woman on a ventilator, or a woman with stitches and a spiking BP and a family at the glass saying not again. And when those excuses die, what comes next is the honest accounting, the admission to Victoria that she ignored her better angels, the apology to Victor that will not move his eyes, the awkward, necessary step into a meeting where strangers tell their own version of the same mistake and do not flinch when she says Nikki's name, because they've learned that secrecy is Relapse's favorite tool, the relinquishing of her license, not in a courthouse snarl, but in a kitchen, sliding the plastic across to Kyle with hands that shake because freedom turned out to be a poor caretaker of judgment this time. The commitment to a sponsor who already knows the particular cruelty of drinking in a family defined by a matriarch's war with the bottle. Nikki's history hangs over everything like a stern tutor, even especially if she survives with resilience and grace. The symbolism of Claire nearly turning the Newman matriarch into a statistic will change conversations forever, because there is a difference between knowing someone's struggle in headlines and colliding with it in real time. And Claire will feel that difference each time she tries to make a case that she is more than her worst night. The town will test her on that assertion, and so will Victor, who will not perform forgiveness on anyone's schedule, who will funnel his fear into fury because that is his native language, who will reach for levers legal, financial, socialdo keep Kyle's son, Kyle's future, and the broader Newman interests insulated from what he will call chaos wearing a diamond. And no amount of whispered assurances from Victoria will fully bend him toward mercy until he sees something more than paperwork and a carefully worded statement. For Kyle, the path forward is a narrow ridge between two cliffs. On one side, the temptation to fix it all with force, to accelerate Audra's exit with methods that invite their own headlines, to throw money at PR and lawyers until the narrative looks cleaner. On the other side, the braver and harder work of sitting in rooms with Claire where nothing spins, choosing routine over spectacle, choosing transparency over spin, asking Harrison's therapists how to talk about mistakes so they become teachers instead of ghosts, and enduring the eye contact of a town that loves to forget its own sins while cataloging everyone else's. He will falter because grief and fear and love are clumsy drivers. But the measure of him will be whether he lets those stumbles become patterns or course corrections. Audra will not make those choices easier. She will bait him with leaks about a so-called pattern in Claire's behavior. She will dangle rumors that she and Victor are aligned in purpose. She will threaten new allegations unless Kyle meets her at a private address outside the camera grid, and Kyle will hear in that invitation the old throb of a darker plan, the one he swore off when he realized how thin the ice is beneath anyone willing to erase a problem. Rather than outgrow it, he will go another way if he is wise, marshaling facts instead of fantasies, documenting Audra's false pregnancy claim, her harassment campaign, her incitements, taking them not to a shadowed alley, but to HR departments, to law enforcement, to restraining orders that startle even consummate manipulators. It will feel insufficient in the short term because vindication moves slower than rage. But it is the only path that doesn't boomerang back through his living room with handcuffs attached. Meanwhile, Claire's arc cannot be blue-washed into a lesson of the week and forgotten. The terms of real consequence should be specific and lived in. A SCRAM device that hums reminders into every quiet hour. Mandatory meetings that don't care if the paparazzi camp outside. Community service that puts her not in a back office stapling pamphlets, but on the hard benches with families waiting for loved ones to be discharged after their own avoidable nights. A courtroom acceptance of responsibility that uses full sentences and no softening euphemisms. And a deferred sentencing arrangement whose conditions are strict enough to be meaningful and calibrated enough to recognize first offense, cooperation, and the mercy of an outcome where Nikki heals. In the best version of this, Claire will build a boundary around herself that includes Nikki's recovery story rather than dishonoring it. She will ask to meet not for absolution, which is none of her business, to request but to listen, to absorb the wisdom of a woman who refused to be reduced to her addiction and demanded better of herself every tedious day. And if that meeting happens, it will mark the true pivot in Claire's story, because accountability borrowed from a judge evaporates. Accountability borrowed from a survivor embeds. And still the plot will churn, because Y and R's engine is never content with one fire. Michael will be asked by two opposing camps to advise. And the way he threads that needle will say much about his own search for redemption. Victor will test corporate pressure points to keep Kyle obedient even as he contemplates how to discipline a daughter he loves without compromising the message that drunk driving is a red line. Victoria will carry the impossible bundle of roles: mother of Claire, daughter of Nikki, executive ally to Victor, and she will discover that the only way through competing loyalties is to refuse the false choice and insist on both. Support for Nikki and accountability for Claire. Protection for the company and space for her child to rebuild. And in the background, because villains rarely rest when heroes are occupied, Audra will try to convert Claire's crisis into immunity for herself, misreading the room with the hubris of someone who believes a town's appetite for drama equates to blindness, and finding instead that even Genoa City has lines that are not merely thematic, but communal. That there are moments like a near loss of its matriarch when the town remembers who it wants to be and rejects the opportunist trying to turn grief into currency. In the end, the question of how far Claire can go is not an inquiry into scandal escalation, but into the tensile strength of remorse, discipline, and love under stress. She went too far the moment the keys turned, but how far forward from there is measured by choices stacked, day on day, not PR statements or elegantly mournful eyes. Kyle can help by refusing shortcuts, by building a home where honesty is the quiet decor, by letting Harrison see adults who fall and then do the boring work of standing again without blaming the ground. Victor can help by allowing his justified anger to coexist with an understanding that mercy is not the enemy of standards. Nikki, if she chooses and if her body allows, can harness her survival yet again into a story big enough to hold both warning and welcome. And Audra, despite her appetite for chaos, can be neutralized by institutions finally choosing to operationalize boundaries instead of merely demanding them. The spoilers are right about one thing: Claire's problems will not vanish, because problems obey inertia and attention and ritual more than wishes. And both Audra's revenge and Kyle's first impulse to bulldoze are accelerants rather than solutions. But there is a map out of this, marked by the unglamorous mileposts of contrition, structure. And if Claire walks it rigorous life, the woman who nearly imploded on a joy-drunk night becomes the woman who protects her future with the alertness of someone who has felt the shudder of mortality. In the town that never forgets will at least learn to remember this chapter differently. Not as the night she wrecked everything, but as the night she refused to lie to herself anymore and began the long, sober work of deserving the life she almost lost.